It is August 12th, 2026, and it's just after 11 a.m. local time here in Texas as the U.S. military is facing an increasing crisis. You have the USS Abraham Lincoln. It has been at sea for now more than 8 months. And to say that the sailors on board are miserable would be an understatement, as we have reports that multiple sailors have tried to jump overboard off of the aircraft carrier because they are essentially right now in a floating prison, a prison that is supposed to be helping with this ongoing war of choice against Iran. The U.S. is not under attack. There's no reason that this aircraft carrier should have been at sea since November of last year. There's no reason that the U.S. should be putting its military in such a dire situation to where the service members on board would consider suicide over having to continue to try to wait out this deployment, not knowing exactly when it will end or what it will look like. It's a picture of the entire Trump administration and the position that they are currently in, fighting these wars. And for what? To make their special interest rich, to continue to use up more munitions in the hopes that they're going to really kickstart the military industrial complex here in this country. None of it is taking us anywhere good. So what does that mean for what we should be keeping an eye on as we continue to follow all of these ongoing conflicts? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a defense and foreign policy analyst and former Pentagon advisor. Colonel Macgregor, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Sure, happy to be here.
Always good to have you on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know there's been a lot of talk on social media. Reports are saying that when President Trump left the NATO summit in Turkey last month, that he faked his departure on Air Force One while being shuttled in an airport catering truck to a military aircraft where he secretly flew out of the country. Now, all of this due to concerns that Iran had his location in Ankara and would try to bomb his plane upon departure. We also have reports that Turkey believes that this was all fabricated by Israel to sabotage negotiations and to make Trump think that Iran is out to get him. But what do you make of this entire story, and what does it tell us about the position that Trump is in here as he has waged this war against Iran and now can't seem to get out of it?
Unfortunately, I think Erdogan is probably closer to the truth than anybody. I think Trump is still under duress of some kind. I mean, this is not the man that I knew several years ago. And when I was speaking to him in private, I saw no evidence for any interest in a war with Iran. In fact, I saw the opposite. He was quite convinced that without any kind of belligerence or conflict, some sort of arrangement could be reached. I don't think there's any deeper meaning to the whole business than to say that obviously he's being told things, and this is being connection to Iran, but truthfully, the Iranians have never threatened him. And they, at least under the previous supreme leader, adhered to the prohibition on assassination of foreign leaders, something which we would do well to go back to. But, you know, who knows? I would be frank with you. When I look at what's going on right now, I see a couple of things happening that I think are frankly much more important. On the one hand, we have reports coming in today from the fleet that sailors on aircraft carriers, specifically the USS Abraham Lincoln, are jumping overboard to get off the ship. They've been out at sea since the 21st of November. I mean, this is incomprehensible. It's inhuman. I mean, even the days of the Royal Navy, which was pretty rough as an institution, they understood there was a 6-month limit, and at that 6-month point, people had to get off the ship. The idea that we would have sailors at sea since 29 November really leads me to question what the admirals are thinking about. What are they doing? One of their critical jobs is to ensure that the people that are out there serving are not unnecessarily abused by their own chain of command. I mean, this is not World War II. During World War II, we worked very hard to rotate people. If you look at the Russians right now in Ukraine, they have been meticulous about rotating forces in and out to avoid these kinds of things. So there's something really, really wrong with the Navy and the armed forces. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and I think Tucker has brought this up, I had not heard this, that apparently Mark Levin and this man Dubowitz, who leads the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, which many of us used to refer to as the Foundation for the Destruction of Everything. They're heavily funded by wealthy Jewish Zionists who are also, fronting for Israel and their own, what they call community interests. I don't know why they just don't change their name to something like La Raza. That's pretty obvious. Says we're about the race. Might as well say the same thing about these organizations. But the point I'm trying to make is, what are people like Mark Levin and Dubowitz talking to Admiral Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM? What role do they have? Well, I'm being told, or Tucker says, they've been sent down there to advise the admiral. Now, unless the president of the United States personally called me and said, I have someone I want you to talk to. And that happens during World War II. MacArthur was asked as a personal favor by FDR to meet with LBJ, who later became president. LBJ was a congressman. There's more to the story, but the bottom line is MacArthur said, yes, absolutely, Mr. President. Now, maybe the president called Cooper and said, I would like you to talk to these two people. But barring that, I wouldn't let them on base. It's absurd. Who are these people? And they're being sent to advise the admiral. I think the admiral should pay more attention to what's happening aboard ship right now in the Indian Ocean. So, I mean, this kind of thing tells me we're worse than bankrupt. We've lost our balance, our sense of understanding. We are not fighting the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is not an existential fight. We're simply doing this because wealthy Jews in the United States who support Israel have managed to get control of our government and have said, we want the U.S. Armed Forces to fight for Israel. That's what we're doing. End of discussion.
And you've got Israel bragging about it, right? Bragging that the United States is carrying out this war against Iran and that they don't have to. And I'm with you. When you look at these reports, it's horrifying to see. And this was a choice, right? We knew the reports have been there. The writing has been on the wall. When you have these aircraft carriers out at sea for months and months, the morale is going to be low, right? You have all of these people on board that they're looking at this war and going, why are we here? Why are we sacrificing so much and being miserable day in, day out? They're not ready to engage in a direct war, and the U.S. is not under threat, at least not our homeland. But when you look at the Trump administration and their handling of this war, I know it has gotten to the point where on any given day, Trump can be threatening a major attack, and then he'll go back to saying, oh, we're not worried about it. We control the Strait of Hormuz. So much of the focus has been on his antics and his rhetoric, but what are the very real concerns for the U.S. military if we do end up having to face some kind of a major war? Because right now it doesn't seem like we're even ready for the war that the U.S. establishment went and sought out and chose to fight in.
Listen, you're 100% correct. The good news is, and this, of course, flies in the face of what everybody in Washington believes, but the truth is nobody wants to fight us. Our problems are all internal. And you can certainly make an argument we have problems with drug cartels and human trafficking and so forth in the Caribbean and Mexico. Absolutely. But as far as an external military threat to the United States, no one wants to go to war with us. If Putin had wanted this to become a major war, he could have turned it into a major war months, years ago. One of the reasons he's been so methodical, so deliberate, and frankly, from the standpoint of many Russians, so slow, is he wants to avoid unnecessary casualties. He initially wanted to avoid killing Ukrainians that he felt should not be killed. He didn't want to destroy infrastructure. Now, all of those things have turned around. He's been compelled to do it all. But he has been very methodical and very deliberate because he does not want to provoke a war with the United States and NATO. And frankly, when you listen to the Russians, they have a very inflated view of NATO. I mean, I hate to be blunt, but if NATO were half as threatening as the Russians think it is, we might have a snowball's chance in hell of defeating them, but we don't. So NATO is a paper tiger in the sheer sense of the word. Now, the other question is, what about all of these antics? And I think that people are concluding one of two things. Initially, his supporters said, well, this is the signature strategy of the strategic genius that is Trump. I think that's sort of died away. And on the other hand, what you've got now are people saying, well, the man's not really balanced. And he's given to these emotional outbursts. Then people say, well, who's he listening to? My question is not just who is he listening to, but what is he being told? Is he aware of what's happening to the sailors at sea on those ships? Is he aware of the damage that we've done to ourselves in this war with Iran, with everyone? I mean, nobody seems to understand. It started with the tariff nonsense. We did not simply harm the people that we insisted were opposed to us, Russians, Chinese, North Koreans, so forth. We harmed our friends. We harmed the Japanese. We harmed the Koreans. We've harmed Europeans. We've harmed people all over the world with these ridiculous tariffs, alienated, billions of people. So that set the sort of stage for the broader stupidity. And what we've done is essentially said, either you're with us or against us. The sort of George Bush statement at the beginning of 2001. I don't think that worked out very well. And this time it's been catastrophic because everybody's walking away. Just read the material going back and forth between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I mean, literally, the Sunni Arab world, they're declaring the UAE to be traitors, have sold themselves to the Jews in Israel. They're now the enemy. This is a very, very interesting but dangerous development. And so when we look at this, some people say we shouldn't call it an alliance. We should sort of compare it to, I think Chaz Freeman suggested calling it an entente. Well, it was an entente before World War I between the French, the Russians, and the British. Turned out to be an alliance. And all of this is really focused preeminently on Israel in this Greater Israel Project. Now, some of my friends in the Middle East are telling me that the Egyptians are lining up to join this alignment. What this means is that Israel, that's always had problems in the region, is now completely isolated. And whose fault is it? Well, it's their fault, obviously, but we haven't helped matters because we've jumped into the pit along with the Israelis, 100%. So where are our friends? Who are they? Where are they? I don't think we have any. Anybody who thinks that Mr. Erdogan is our friend or Israel's friend is obviously either stupid or just retarded, because he's not. We know that. That doesn't mean he's Iran's friend. The Irans and the Turks have a long, long history, but they also understand the criticality of pulling together when necessary against external enemies, I think more so now than ever. So they're certainly going to back up this Sunni alliance if necessary. And then you have the Russian, Iranian, Chinese alliance, enormously powerful. And Brzezinski told everyone back in the 90s, and in fact, you can go back further to Sam Huntington in his book on Clash of Civilizations. He made a similar point where he said, if you get Russia, China, and Iran into some semblance of an alliance, we're finished on the Eurasian continent. So the real question is, can it get any worse? I suppose it can. But I think the game has been called, as they say. This war is lost. So how much longer do you persist in it at the expense of your own military power, the expense of your own national resources? I don't know, but I think the president would be wise to find people to tell him the truth about what's really going on if he's not hearing it.
Yeah, that's the scary part in the reports that we have seen saying that Trump is just wanting a 2-minute highlight video of all of the best strikes that the US carried out when they were actively bombing Iran. And you look at that and you go, okay, does he want the truth? Does he want to know how dire the situation is, how miserable our service members are that are stuck overseas in this war of choice that the US is waging? And I know one thing that you mentioned in a recent post on X was that every ceasefire in the conflict with Iran has had one thing in common: it did not last. And in the case of last month's attacks from the US, new fronts opened as we saw clashes between Ansar Allah in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And so, looking at this overall war, I know the major axis of resistance, they have a number of ways in which they can target the US and they can target Israel. And they can also work together. And even with the memorandum of understanding, I know that it was called a surrender document for the US, but Trump could have used that as an off-ramp, right? He could have taken it, said, okay, well, we'll use this to get to a final deal, to end this war, to be done with this, to focus on other things, hopefully matters at home. But he chose not to do that. So what are your concerns when it comes to where we could be headed and future clashes in this conflict as the U.S. continues to be a part of it?
Well, I think you've said something that's very important when you talked about what's happening with Ansar Allah and the emergence of new actors, period, that are aligning increasingly with the what I would call the anti-Israeli American axis. I think the preeminent goal right now for Iran is to complete the evacuation of U.S. forces from the Middle East. That's number one. That's something they absolutely want to accomplish. Remember, their initial objective was to survive. They've done that. They've done it in spades. They've demonstrated not only that they can survive, but that they have the power to strike back very, very, very decisively against us. So right now, it's what can they do? And they don't have to do much, because the longer this lasts, the more the various Sunni states will conclude that we're a liability, not an asset. They don't have to be pushed. They'll join the effort to expel us as well. So I don't think the Iranians are going to do anything at this stage. The question is, what do we do? We have no long-term strategic focus. I would argue that we had something of a strategic focus under Eisenhower at the beginning of the Cold War. This was called containment, although I don't think he or Kennan or many of the people that authored containment imagined that it would take us to the extent that it did into all sorts of places like Vietnam and elsewhere on the grounds that we were fighting communism everywhere. Having said that, we have no such long-term focus. Now, obviously, the Zionist Jewish community of billionaires and their supporters have gotten us a focus, whether we like it or not. They bought the focus. I read that 80% of the members of the Senate and the House are taking enormous funds from the Zionist Jewish lobby. So that you write off the House and the Senate, they've just parked U.S. national interest on the side of the road. They're riding in the Israeli provided conveyance. Trump has got his own private conveyance that is also courtesy of the Israel lobby. So there's nobody looking at the long-term national strategic interest of the United States. We have equated the destruction of Iran, which is the real goal of the Jewish state and its backers in the United States, which is designed to put Israel and the United States in support, in control of the oil resources in the Persian Gulf and the region, period. To understand this, you've got to go back to the 90s and read Richard Pearl and Wolfowitz and the rest of these people, who even then were talking about why we needed to control these resources so that we could have China by the throat. I mean, stop and think about that. Of course, at the time, they did not anticipate what Russia would do and the massive influx of oil and gas and all the other products that China needs from Russia. They did not anticipate China's ability to sustain itself, to import vast quantities of coal that could be liquefied and turned into natural gas or other fuels. Having said all of that, I think the problem is right now, beyond the destruction of Iran, there is no goal. Now, somebody was trying to tell me that there's still actually preparation underway to invade Cuba, which, I would think is pure, unadulterated insanity. If you look at Cuba, it is the one nation in the history of our country that we have invaded more often than any other. People don't realize this. We went into Cuba 3 times. 3 times we invaded, 3 times we occupied, 3 times we were involved in writing the Constitution and supervising elections because we were trying to give the Cuban people what they wanted. Well, whatever they wanted, I don't think it was us. And we see how that turned out. I can't imagine anybody in Cuba being happy to see us. Now, we have a lot of Cubans that seem to want to go back. They've never really become Americans, sadly, because most of the people, let us say, that I know from Latin America who came here legally, who have become Americans, they don't want to go back. And they certainly don't want to rebuild Latin America on American soil. But apparently that seems to be the case with these Cubans. Well, then they should go back. But as for the rest of us, it's sheer lunacy. And trying to convince us, well, it's communist and therefore it deserves to be eradicated. Why? We have lots of states all over the world. Some you could construe as communist, some are fascist, call them authoritarian. I don't care what you call them. It's not in our interest to change any of them because they are imperfect liberal democracies. That's a lot of nonsense. So I hope that's not true. I hope after this miserable failure strategically in the Gulf against Iran that we will walk away from that. But you've got a lot of people who are telling the president, Mr. President, our regional and our global hegemony is at risk. Well, I have a newsflash. We never really had global hegemony. We may have been more powerful than everyone, but global hegemony, that's a tall challenge. If that's what everybody thinks they're fighting for, they're completely nuts because it'll not only bankrupt us, we don't need it, and the rest of the world doesn't want it. So, how do you deal with these people that are fantasizing on this scale? And everything is done at the expense of the American people and our country and its stability, its prosperity, its security. It's frustrating. I don't have any good answers, but I don't see anything good happening in the short run because I don't think Donald Trump can stand up and tell his donors and the people that are really controlling Washington, and they're not Americans, they're not interested in us. They're interested in Israel and international Jewish power and finance. I think he can't tell them it's over. We've done all we're going to do. This has backfired. I'm getting out. Now, he could if he wasn't under some kind of duress. I think he is. I don't know what it is. Because if you look at the polls, if he said, that's it, we are disengaging, and formally notify the Iranians, over the next 30 days, we are disengaging our armed forces from the region. Please don't interfere with us as we go. Told our partners, we're out. He would be cheered from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Look at the polling data. Over 70% say, we don't want the war. We don't need to fight the war. It's not in our interest to have this war. And then he could focus like a laser on the problems that we have, which are serious and numerous. I don't necessarily think he can solve them all. It's going to take us a decade to climb out of the pit that we've dug for ourselves. But we can begin, and he can start that, and everybody would welcome it, I think, don't you?
Yeah, I do too. And yeah, you look at Trump in the position that he's in, and I'm with you. I think that there's more to the story, definitely more in his ear if he thinks that Iran is out to get him, so much so that he's having to hop on another plane and escape the NATO summit. It's like, yeah, he probably thinks he can't get out of this. But if he were to move to lift the sanctions on Iran, Iran's not going to come after the US. They're not going to pose a threat. No, they're going to want to work with us, at least as far as the US is willing to work with them and not to wage another war against them. And it is incredibly troubling when we see all of these reports of munition shortages, and they always bring up, well, how is this going to affect the US when it comes to a future war with, say, China, right? China is always still the big bad guy, even though they don't want a war with the US. And I did think it was notable. The last thing I wanted to bring up here, there's this NBC News article which didn't get a lot of attention, and it states that the Defense Department's policy chief, Elbridge Colby, is drafting a new U.S. nuclear strategy that emphasizes the possible use of shorter range tactical weapons in a case of regional war with China or Russia. They always pull out tactical nukes as if it's, oh yeah, it's the latest glide bomb or, whatever ballistic missile, not as if it is a nuclear weapon. Where do your concerns stand when it comes to the overall U.S. establishment trying to pick an even greater conflict, because clearly they haven't learned from the proxy war against Russia or the all-out war against Iran?
Well, as you know, I supported RFK Jr. for president. And when I was working for him, one of the things that I strongly urged, and he agreed with it, was that we should adopt no first use. Now, the Chinese have a no first use policy. They made that very clear. I see no evidence that the Chinese are not serious. I mean, after all, the Chinese, certainly since 1990, have been involved in the largest construction enterprise in the history of mankind. Why would you want to put all of that at risk in a nuclear exchange with anyone? So that's just absurd to suggest that about the Chinese. Let's turn to the Russians. The Russians effectively said the same thing, but they've been watching us. And they've been listening to the Europeans who've made a lot of stupid statements. And they listened to statements made under Biden. And Biden changed our nuclear strategy and essentially said, we may use it if we decide to do so. We didn't condition it to territorial defense, which is really what it had become over the years. He opened the door. I know Colby not well, but I met him. And obviously, I'm not a fan. I have always regarded the use of any nuclear weapon as leading inevitably to an escalation that would be devastating for this planet. Now, people say, well, what do you mean by that? What's your evidence for that? Well, let's go back to somebody like Colin Powell when he was the chairman. And again, Colin Powell let a lot of people down later on, but when he was chairman, he went through a number of simulations, computer simulations, as we always do with senior officers, specifically focused on how you go through a high-end conventional conflict, then you reach a point where you may have to use a nuclear weapon. And this whole issue of, well, we'll use a tactical nuclear weapon came up. And he said, so you think the Russians are going to sit there and they're going to say, oh, wait a minute, that's only a small nuclear weapon. That's not a big one. So let's let that go. And he said, that's absurd. If you use it, you're going to lose it. Everything is going to be involved. And so the notion that this is going to be taken seriously and presented for approval is very disturbing. There is an element in the senior ranks of the Air Force and the Navy who have always advocated this. Now, in the Navy, people think, well, we'll launch this TAC nuke from a submarine, then the submarine dives, and then the enemy thinks about it. I'm sorry, that's not true. Or we use it as a signal from the Air Force and the fleet, say, we're serious now. They don't get it. They need to be cashiered out of the service. We don't need people like that. And control of these nuclear weapons has to be very firm, very strict, and very limited to only the people that have the authority under the Constitution to make this decision. I think the president, I've felt for a very long time we need to change the structure of the armed forces, and particularly the command and control structure. I wrote a paper on it. Everybody can go on my Substack and read it. And I wrote it at RFK Jr.'s suggestion. And the point I was trying to make was we don't have the right unified military command structure, and we need a National Defense Committee, not the National Security Council, National Defense Committee. And you need key people on that. And that must be convened come hell or high water with the president to advise him in the event that there is any kind of discussion of or evidence for the use of a nuclear weapon. We need to sort these things out. Everybody forgets, everybody worships at the altar of the Constitution. Good Lord, Rachel, that thing was written in the 1780s. It was a great document. The people that wrote it expected it to be replaced in 20 years. Here we sit. The nation today is radically different from the nation that existed then. And so we need to overhaul that. But in the meantime, we're dealing with a president who's probably never read the Constitution, or he did. He gave it a very short read, and takes a position. If he needs to know something, he'll ask somebody on the staff. This is not a well-read, well-educated man, frankly. He's not unique. That applies to most of the people that are making decisions on the Hill. I hate to be blunt, but you're not dealing with people like Fulbright or other senators that we used to have, or Sam Nunn, or any number who actually sat down and studied and read and kept themselves well informed. So we're in a lot of trouble. That's the way I would sum it up as a country. There's no easy way out, and I don't think President Trump is going to act independently to get us out of anything.
Yeah, that's the scary part when you look at the position that we're in, the conflicts the US has waged around the world, and the wars they continue to pursue. And you ask yourself the question, okay, how do we get out of this? And it doesn't seem like they are pursuing that in any sense. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest here. Retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a defense and foreign policy analyst and former Pentagon advisor, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Sure, thank you.